Welcome to the problem of the Purloined prototype, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series The Lost Cases of Young Sherlock. Before Baker Street, playing in the year 1874. Many believe my chronicles began our story, but a recent discovery at the Trevor estate has unearthed a history that predates even my own knowledge of the man. Within a collection of letters and journals from his university years, we find the nascent genius at work. These are the lost cases of young Sherlock before Baker Street. This first account, drawn from his own annotated notebooks, details a curious affair he called the problem of the Purloined prototype. Chapter 1. It was during my time at Cambridge that I first became truly acquainted with the singular abilities of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Our university lodgings, though modest, were a constant theatre of his peculiar studies, a whirlwind of arcane knowledge and strange apparatus. On this particular Tuesday, a persistent autumn rain lashed against the window panes. The room was filled with the acrid scent of some chemical experiment with which Holmes was busying himself at a corner table. He had been silent for the better part of an hour, a fact for which my beleaguered senses were grateful. The quiet was shattered not by a knock, but by a frantic, percussive assault upon our door that spoke of dire urgency. Before I could rise from my chair, the latch rattled and the door flew inward, admitting a gust of wind and a young man whose face was pale with distress. "You are Victor Trevor, are you not? You have run the entire way from the direction of Trumpington Street, yet your haste began near the river, for I observe the distinct clay of the backs upon your left boot," remarked Sherlock Holmes. The young man stared, his panic momentarily eclipsed by astonishment. He was a fellow student whom I knew only by sight, a sturdy fellow not easily shaken. To see him in such a state was alarming. "Holmes, but how did you—" "No, there's no time. I desperately need your help. It's Thomas Ashton, my friend, a matter of grave importance," remarked Victor Trevor. With exasperating calm, Holmes set down his glass retort. Only a slight narrowing of his eyes betrayed interest as he turned, long fingers leaving chemical smears on the rag he used. "Ashton, the engineering scholar. I am aware of his work. Pray, compose yourself and state the facts of your case clearly. Emotion is the enemy of logic," explained Sherlock Holmes. Trevor took a steadying breath, his voice still trembling with exertion and anxiety. "His prototype, the telegraphic device. It's gone, stolen. He's worked on it for 2 years, Holmes. 2 years. The demonstration is in 3 days. Without it, he's ruined. Utterly ruined," remarked Victor Trevor. With a decisive clatter, Holmes pushed his chemical apparatus aside, the half-finished experiment instantly abandoned. The languor fell away from him like a discarded coat. The thrill of the chase had entered his blood. I could see it in the sudden, sharp focus of his eyes. Here was not a simple theft of property, but an assault on ingenuity, a puzzle worthy of his faculties. "Stolen, you say? From a locked room?" Sherlock Holmes responded. "Yes, from a locked room. He was gone for a moment, just a moment, and returned to find the window forced. The device was gone, but nothing else. Don't you see? It was targeted. A malicious, deliberate act," said Victor Trevor. Holmes was on his feet now, his eyes shining with that peculiar intensity I would come to know so well. He paced the small room twice, his long strides eating up the space as if it were a cage. The rain outside seemed to beat a frantic rhythm to his thoughts. He stopped abruptly, turning to face our visitor with a piercing gaze. "This is no common thievery. It is a crime against intellect itself. The thief is not a mere housebreaker. He is a rival, an opportunist who understands the machine's true value." "Watson, fetch my coat and hat," stated Sherlock Holmes. His voice was sharp, decisive, a blade cutting through the fog of our quiet afternoon. The abandoned beakers on his corner table stood as a testament to the shift, their pungent odor already lost to the scent of impending adventure. "Mr. Trevor, there is not a moment to waste. The trail, such as it is, grows colder with every drop of this infernal rain. Lead me to your friend's lodgings at once. The game is afoot. Sherlock Holmes noted. It was at Victor Trevor's urgent behest that Holmes and I found ourselves in a hansom cab, its wheels clattering over the ancient, winding streets of Cambridge. A fine mist hung in the air, muffling the clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the distant rumble of city life, lending the grand college facades a spectral quality. I have known Trevor to be a boisterous man, but on this journey he was quite subdued, sitting opposite us and twisting his gloves in his hands. I do hope we're not too late, Mr. Holmes. Tom is a brilliant fellow, but he doesn't have the constitution for this sort of shock. He puts everything of himself into his work. Victor Trevor said. We alighted before a modest brick lodging-house, from which the faint but distinct metallic scent of solder and oil seemed to emanate, accompanied by the low, intermittent hum of some unseen electrical apparatus. A young man with a pale, drawn face and eyes wide with anxiety met us at the door. This was Thomas Ashton, the inventor. His voice, when he spoke, was thin and strained, as if stretched to its breaking point. Mr. Holmes, Trevor, thank God you brought him. Please come in, come in. It's just up the stairs. Forgive the state of things, replied Thomas Ashton. He led us up a narrow staircase, each tread groaning under our combined weight, to a set of rooms on the second floor. The main chamber served as both study and workshop, the air thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal. Books on electrical theory were piled high on every surface, competing for space with spools of copper wire and an array of delicate instruments. Papers lay strewn about in calculated chaos. On the main workbench, an open wooden chest gaped empty, its precious contents stolen. The thief was no common housebreaker. There is no sign of forced entry on your door, Mr. Ashton. He knew what he was looking for, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's keen eyes swept the room, missing no detail. He gestured towards the empty chest. This contained the prototype, I presume. Describe it for me, explained Sherlock Holmes. Ashton ran a trembling hand through his already disheveled hair. A spark of the inventor's fire returned to his eyes as he began to speak, his voice gaining a measure of strength. It was a telegraphic resonator. It can send multiple signals on one wire at the same time without mixing them up. Mr. Holmes, it would change everything. Imagine the transatlantic cable carrying 10 times the messages. In just 3 days, I was to show it to the university board and the post office, said Thomas Ashton. He's barely slept for a month, Holmes, lived on coffee and sheer will. There are others in the department who would give a great deal to see him fail, replied Victor Trevor. Ignoring our host's lamentations for the moment, Holmes had gravitated towards the single window. He produced his pocket lens and knelt, his long, thin nose nearly touching the sill. The room fell utterly silent, our collective breaths held in check. The only sound was the steady, soft hiss of the gas lamp on the wall. After a long moment, he made a soft sound of satisfaction and rose, a peculiar glint in his eye. Our visitor did not use the stairs. He came and went through here, Sherlock Holmes noted. Through the window. But we're on the second floor, Victor Trevor replied. He pointed a slender finger at the wooden frame. To my eye, it appeared unremarkable, but Holmes, of course, saw far more. The latch is simple, easily manipulated from the outside with a thin blade. But our man was not entirely careful. Observe, Watson, observed Sherlock Holmes. I leaned closer, my face near Holmes's shoulder. At first, I saw nothing but the dark, weathered wood of the outer sill, damp from the evening mist. Then, following his gaze, I perceived it, a faint, crescent-shaped smudge of a curious reddish-brown color. As a medical man, I am familiar with all manner of stains, but this was foreign to me, a clay of a consistency I did not recognize. Mud from his boot, Holmes, wondered Dr. John Watson. Precisely, but not the common grey mud of the Cambridge streets. This is a specific, iron-rich clay. It tells us our thief has recently trod upon a particular type of soil. A small detail, but the first solid stone upon which we may build our case, observed Sherlock Holmes. He turned back to the distraught inventor, his tone now brisk and businesslike, the thrill of the chase having fully eclipsed any other sentiment. Mr. Ashton, you mentioned your demonstration. Who amongst your academic colleagues and rivals would have the most to gain from your failure? Stated Sherlock Holmes. As dawn broke, we found ourselves not amid the hushed quadrangles of the classic scholars, but thrust into the bustling heart of the engineering department. The air itself seemed charged, and a muffled, rhythmic clamor hinted at the industry behind the heavy oak doors. Holmes paused outside one, his head tilted. Listen, Watson, not one sound, but a dozen, a symphony of creation and competition. Let us see the orchestra, declared Sherlock Holmes. He pushed the door open, and the sound washed over us. The low thrum of a great steam engine, the high-pitched whine of a lathe, the sharp, percussive clang of hammer on steel, and the insistent hiss of pressure valves. The air was thick with the scent of machine oil and hot metal. Holmes seemed to draw energy from it, his eyes alight with keen interest. Notice the dust here is of a different sort entirely. It is metallic, greasy, a far cry from the reddish, alluvial clay we found upon Ashton's windowsill. The perpetrator did not belong to this world. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Our first port of call was the office of Professor Edelston, a sanctuary of quiet contemplation amidst the chaos. Books on metallurgy and mechanics lined the walls, and the only sounds were the ticking of a mantel clock and the rustle of blueprints. Edelston, a man with a face like a worn anvil, confirmed Ashton's brilliance. Ashton is a visionary, Mr. Holmes, but vision attracts vultures. We have observers from industry. They circle like sharks, looking for the next great innovation. It adds a certain pressure. It can make ambitious young men reckless, replied Professor Edelston. From the professor's office, we entered the main workshop. The cacophony intensified, a testament to dozens of minds and hands at work. Young men, their faces streaked with grease and their brows furrowed in concentration, hunched over benches laden with brass fittings, coiled wires, and half-finished mechanisms. The air crackled with a competitive energy. Holmes did not make directly for our primary person of interest. Instead, he paused by a bench where a student was meticulously assembling a complex series of gears. Holmes watched for a moment before speaking, his voice cutting cleanly through the din. A fascinating differential gear assembly. Your own design, Sherlock Holmes noted. The student, a fair-haired fellow named Arthur Finch, looked up, startled. A flicker of pride replaced his surprise. It is, sir, a humble effort compared to some. We're all just trying to keep up with Thomas Ashton. Arthur Finch answered. Ah, yes, Mr. Ashton. His recent misfortune is the talk of the department, I imagine, replied Sherlock Holmes. It is, sir, a terrible business. His work, it's revolutionary. Some are jealous, of course, but most of us, well, we're more worried for him. The pressure from those industrial sponsors is immense. They watch everything, and they don't like to lose, responded Arthur Finch. Finch glanced nervously towards a group of older gentlemen in suits conversing with another professor near the entrance, confirming Edelston's warning. This undercurrent of admiration, mixed with fear, seemed a far more common sentiment than simple jealousy. With a nod of thanks, Holmes's gaze swept the room, finally settling on the solitary figure in the far corner whom the professor had indicated to us. Reginald Hayes. Hayes was working alone, the rhythmic rasp of a file on brass the only sound from his station. He did not look up as we approached. When Holmes cleared his throat, Hayes started, dropping the file with a sharp clang. Mr. Reginald Hayes, I presume. We are making some inquiries on behalf of your colleague, Mr. Thomas Ashton. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Hayes's eyes narrowed. He wiped a greasy hand on his leather apron, a gesture that did little to hide the sudden tension in his posture. A guarded, almost disdainful expression fell over his features. Ashton, still trying to build castles in the sky with wire and hope, is he. His designs are elegant on paper, but lack the fortitude for practical application. They are fragile, Mr. Reginald Hayes said. And yet his work has attracted considerable attention. Tell me, Mr. Hayes, does your own, more practical work often take you for walks along the River Cam? Explained Sherlock Holmes. The question was so abrupt, so out of place, that it clearly unsettled him. Hayes faltered for a moment, his gaze flicking towards the door. I fail to see the relevance, Mr. Reginald Hayes replied. The relevance is this. The clay found on Mr. Ashton's windowsill is unique to the muddy banks near the boathouses. A path, I am told, you frequent on your evening constitutionals. A path Mr. Ashton, who detests the water, is never known to take. It is a simple deduction, but often the simplest are the most damning, declared Sherlock Holmes. Hayes paled, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. He looked for all the world like a cornered rat. It proves nothing, Mr. Reginald Hayes replied. He sputtered, his voice rising in pitch. Half the university walks that path. This is a preposterous accusation, remarked Mr. Reginald Hayes. Holmes offered a thin smile and turned to leave. As we walked back across the courtyard, the sounds of the workshop fading behind us, I felt a sense of triumph. Holmes, however, was more circumspect. Hayes has the motive of jealousy and the opportunity, as evidenced by the clay. But his resentment feels almost too perfect, too obvious. There are other forces at play here, Watson. The whispers of industrial interest, for one. No, this problem requires a broader perspective, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A broader perspective? What do you mean? Dr. John Watson added. A flicker of amusement crossed his face as he quickened his pace, his long strides carrying us purposefully towards the older part of the college. I mean, it is time we consulted a different sort of expert. We shall present the facts of the case to the Dilettante Detectives Club this very evening, observed Sherlock Holmes. The rooms of the Dilettante Detectives Club, nestled within the ancient stone of St. Luke's College, were a sanctuary of comfortable intellect. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and pipe smoke, and the only sound was the low crackle of a log fire and the rustle of turning pages. It was into this placid atmosphere that Holmes and I entered, the heavy oak door groaning shut behind us and silencing the distant chime of a college clock. Ah, Holmes, Watson, we had nearly given you up. Come, take a seat by the fire. We were just debating the psychological profile of the Borgias, said Victor Trevor. The greeting was boomed by Victor Trevor, a man whose hearty enthusiasm often outpaced his logic. He gestured with his pipe towards two empty wingback chairs. The half-dozen other members murmured their greetings. Holmes, however, remained standing, his tall, lean frame casting a long shadow in the flickering firelight. He waited, and as he so often willed it, the room fell into an expectant quiet. An interesting topic, Trevor, but I have a puzzle of a more contemporary nature. A problem of the here and now, which may benefit from the collective minds in this room. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Holmes succinctly laid out the case. The stolen prototype, the locked room, and his recent discovery of industrial interests inquiring about Ashton's work. Good heavens, it's as plain as the nose on your face. It is the rival, Hayes. A simple case of jealousy, spurred on by the promise of commercial reward. He steals the device to claim it as his own, answered Victor Trevor. Trevor's simple theory was met with a murmur of agreement. It was a neat, satisfying conclusion that required little effort. But from a corner of the room, a clear, composed voice made itself heard. It belonged to Miss Elena Whitfield, a recent and most astute addition to our club. Is it so simple, Mr. Trevor? A man like Hayes would know he could never pass off Ashton's unique work as his own, not within this university. The risk of exposure and ruin would be absolute. The motive feels insufficient, answered Elena Whitfield. Holmes turned his head slowly, a flicker of keen interest in his sharp eyes. He offered Miss Whitfield a slight nod of approval before addressing the group once more. Precisely. Speculation on motive is a swamp. Let us instead turn to what is solid. Let us examine the physical evidence. Sherlock Holmes said. From his coat pocket, Holmes produced a small twist of paper. The crinkle of its unfolding pierced the silence. With deliberate care, he placed its contents upon a clean handkerchief, a small, dry clod of reddish-brown earth. Victor Trevor leaned forward, his brow furrowed in confusion. "A lump of dirt, Holmes. What on earth can that tell us?" answered Victor Trevor. "This, my friends, was found on the floor of Mr. Ashton's room. It does not match the soil on his boots, nor the common black earth of Cambridge. It is, therefore, the footprint of our visitor. It is his signature," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The members leaned forward, peering at the insignificant lump with renewed interest. It was Miss Whitfield who broke the silence, her voice now laced with a specific, academic curiosity. "That is not common dirt. Observe the reddish hue and the fine, gritty consistency. It is brick clay. Given the color, I would venture it has a high concentration of iron oxide, which is particular to the deposits found near the old industrial pits east of the river," responded Elena Whitfield. A profound silence fell. Trevor stared, mouth agape, but my eyes were on Holmes. I saw a look I rarely witnessed on his features, pure, undisguised admiration. He had not just presented a clue, he had found an expert. "Excellent, Miss Whitfield, truly excellent. Your knowledge of local geology is impeccable. It seems the next stage of our investigation is no longer a matter of who, but of where," Sherlock Holmes said. With his words, the case shifted entirely. It was no longer a simple matter of academic rivalry, but of industrial espionage. Holmes now had a tangible thread to pull, a trail of reddish clay leading away from the university, and I suspected he would not be following it alone. The small pinch of dried earth. I had presumed our next step would be a tedious tour of the city's muddiest lanes. The game is afoot, Watson, and our first move is not to the constabulary, but to secure an expert ally. We shall call upon Miss Whitfield, deduced Sherlock Holmes. I confess I was taken aback. The investigation was one thing, but to involve a young lady in what was sure to be a grimy business seemed a step too far. Miss Whitfield. But Holmes, surely you can't mean to involve a lady in such a sordid business, Dr. John Watson said. "Her knowledge, my dear fellow, is the very thing that is not gritty. It is precise. Did you not hear her? She spoke not of vague suspicions, but of Triassic marl and alluvial deposits. She sees the earth where others see only mud. That is the clarity we require," Sherlock Holmes responded. He was, of course, correct. A short time later, we collected Miss Whitfield, who met us not with apprehension, but with an air of keen, restless curiosity. As our cab rattled over the cobblestones, the sounds of the city began to change, the general hum giving way to the acrid tang of coal smoke and the distant, rhythmic clang of industry. "We are entering the city's engine room, Miss Whitfield. A different sort of geology," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "Every place has its own story written in the earth and the air, Mr. Holmes. One just needs to know how to read it," answered Elena Whitfield. The first two brickworks yielded nothing of value. Each visit assaulted our senses, the air thick with pulverized earth, our ears ringing with the steady, groaning complaint of machinery, punctuated by the sharp hiss of steam. Holmes gestured to the heaps of raw material. "Well, Miss Whitfield, does this dust tell you any tales?" observed Sherlock Holmes. She examined a sample with a practiced eye before shaking her head. "No, this won't do. The color is too ochre, and the texture lacks the fine, almost silken quality of your sample. This is common galt clay, quite useless for our purpose," answered Elena Whitfield. After a similar dismissal at a second location, our cab approached the third establishment, the Blackwood and Sons manufactory. A great plume of dark smoke coiled into the grey sky, and the rhythmic clang was louder here, accompanied by a low, powerful hum from the main building. Piles of a peculiar reddish-grey earth sat waiting in the yard, damp from a recent shower. "This is the place, the Mercia Mudstone Formation. There can be no doubt," responded Elena Whitfield. She spoke with a quiet, final confidence, crumbling a piece between her gloved fingers. But her eyes were not on the clay. They were scanning the factory yard, as if searching for something or someone. Holmes, however, saw only the confirmation he needed and strode towards a broad-shouldered man whose face and arms were smudged with soot, a foreman by his bearing, who was shouting orders over the mechanical roar. "A good day to you. We are making a geological survey. This clay is quite unique." Is the factory owner, a Sir Reginald Blackwood, a man who takes a personal interest in his acquisitions, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The foreman wiped a hand across his brow. His voice, a low rumble that barely carried over the noise. "Sir Reginald knows every shovelful that comes through that gate, demands the best. We had a special order not long ago for a small, non-porous batch. For some sort of electrical insulator, they said. Unusual, that was," remarked Brickworks' foreman. Holmes offered a coin and a sharp nod of thanks. As we turned to leave the cacophony of the works behind us, I chanced a glance at Miss Whitfield. The foreman's mention of Sir Reginald by name had clearly struck a nerve. The polite, analytical mask she wore had slipped, revealing a flicker of what looked like genuine alarm before it was expertly smoothed away. "Is something amiss, Miss Whitfield? You seem troubled," responded Dr. John Watson. "Not at all, doctor. The noise is merely overwhelming. I am glad to be leaving it behind," Elena Whitfield said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes avoided mine. Holmes, for his part, seemed entirely oblivious to this subtle interplay. His mind was already miles ahead, connecting the clay to the foreman's words, forging the next link in his chain of reasoning. He was so engrossed in the hunt that the disquiet of his temporary consultant went completely unobserved. Once we were clear of the gate, the noise receding to a dull thrum, he stopped abruptly on the muddy track. Industrial interest from a man like Blackwood, an unusual order for an insulator, and a rival student desperate for an advantage. The picture gains its frame, Watson. Our next conversation must be with Mr. Reginald Hayes. We shall see what alibi he can possibly offer against such a tide of circumstance," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The crisp autumn air nipped at our faces, carrying the scent of fallen leaves as Holmes, Trevor, and I crossed the great court, our footsteps echoing in the hushed atmosphere. A lone rook cawed from the chapel roof, its call echoing in the studious quiet of the afternoon. Our boots crunched rhythmically on the gravel path, a sound punctuated only by the distant, solemn chime of a college clock marking the hour. Holmes, however, was unusually silent, his gaze distant. His mind was clearly working upon some new and complex permutation of the problem we had uncovered at the clay pits. Our next port of call is Mr. Reginald Hayes. If Ashton is the sun in this small academic firmament, then Hayes, I fancy, is the planet forever trapped in its orbit, burning with reflected light and resentment, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Hayes was always a bitter man. He could never stand to see Thomas succeed, Victor Trevor said. Trevor's voice was low and grim. We soon found ourselves before a soot-stained building of student lodgings. Ascending the narrow staircase, each tread groaned under our combined weight, the air thick with the smell of boiled cabbage and coal dust. From behind a nearby door, we heard a brief snatch of laughter, quickly muffled. At the end of the corridor, Holmes rapped sharply upon a door. After a moment, it was opened by a young man with a severe expression and eyes that held a distinctly competitive fire. "Yes, what is it?" Reginald Hayes replied. "Mr. Reginald Hayes, my name is Sherlock Holmes. I am looking into the matter of the unfortunate theft from Mr. Thomas Ashton. Might we have a word?" observed Sherlock Holmes. Hayes's eyes narrowed, but he stepped aside with a curt nod, the door latch clicking softly as he let us pass. I saw Trevor's gaze sweep the room, a stark contrast to Ashton's creative chaos. This was a space of rigid order, blueprints pinned to the walls with meticulous precision, and I sensed Trevor's immediate distrust of its owner. I have already spoken with the constabulary. I was in the university library from luncheon until it closed. You may ask the proctor. I saw no reason to linger after Ashton's setback, replied Reginald Hayes. His tone was clipped, each word a carefully placed brick in the wall of his alibi. "I do not doubt your whereabouts for a moment, Mr. Hayes. My interest lies more in the general atmosphere of competition. You and Mr. Ashton are rivals, are you not? Both working on advancements in telegraphy," stated Sherlock Holmes. "Rivals. Ashton is a clever amateur. He stumbles upon things. I pursue a more methodical, scientific path. But I suppose you could call it rivalry," Reginald Hayes answered. A flicker of a sneer crossed his lips. Beside me, I heard Trevor draw a sharp breath, his fists clenching at the insult to his friend, but he held his tongue at a subtle glance from Holmes, who leaned forward, his own expression one of benign curiosity. Such a path must attract attention. Is it common for industrial concerns to take an interest in student projects of this nature? Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Hayes straightened up. A note of pride entered his voice, supplanting the earlier defensiveness. "Common, it is everything. This is not merely for a grade, Mr. Holmes. Men of industry are always watching. Sir Reginald Blackwood's company, especially. They send scouts, offer handsome contracts for any prototype that shows promise. They value innovation above all. Ashton's work was promising, I grant you, but far too theoretical. Mine is practical," Reginald Hayes answered. I saw Holmes's eyes gleam for a fraction of a second. In the sudden silence, the ticking of a small clock on the mantelpiece seemed to grow louder, each beat marking time. The name, spoken aloud in this room, had charged the air. He had found the link he was searching for. Sir Reginald Blackwood, a formidable name in British industry. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. You have been most illuminating. You have confirmed that the stakes in this little academic exercise are rather higher than one might have supposed." Sherlock Holmes noted. We took our leave. The sharp click of Hayes's door shutting behind us echoed in the narrow hall. Descending into the open air once more, we were met by the damp scent of evening and the sight of gas lamps beginning to sputter and glow across the quadrangle. The chill was more pronounced now, and Trevor, pulling his collar tight, finally spoke, his frustration evident. "Holmes, what did that prove? The man is arrogant, certainly, but his alibi seems sound," responded Victor Trevor. "On the contrary, Trevor, he proved everything. You see it, do you not? The clay from the boots leads us to a factory owned by Blackwood. The chief rival, in a fit of pique, reveals that this very same Blackwood has a vested financial interest in acquiring these prototypes. This is no longer about a stolen student project, my friends. We are on the edge of a conspiracy of industrial espionage." Sherlock Holmes responded. He paused, his gaze fixing upon a distant gas lamp that had just sputtered to life against the deepening twilight. His next words were low and determined. "The time for questioning is over. Now is the time for observation. Blackwood is our man. Trevor, you and I shall pay a visit to his London offices tonight. We must see what desperate men do when they believe they are not being watched," deduced Sherlock Holmes. "Lead the way, Holmes. For Thomas, I am ready for anything," remarked Victor Trevor. The suspicion Holmes had voiced regarding Sir Reginald Blackwood had settled upon me with a tangible weight. It was this weight that now seemed to press us into the deep shadows of Trinity Street. The Cambridge night was a damp, clinging thing. Gas lamps cast long, distorted figures that danced and writhed as we moved. Holmes, a pace ahead, was but a silhouette, his every movement economical and silent. His voice was a mere whisper, yet it cut through the chill air with absolute clarity. The office is ahead, Trevor. We must assume we are observed from the moment we turn the corner. Stay to the wall. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. I did as instructed, my heart thumping a rather undignified rhythm against my ribs. We rounded the corner onto a narrower lane. A modest brass plaque, gleaming dully in the low light, announced Blackwood and Sons, Regional Office. A single window on the ground floor glowed with a warm, yellow light, a beacon of activity in the sleeping city. Suddenly, Holmes stiffened, pulling me back into the recess of a darkened doorway. From the far end of the lane came a sound that froze the blood, the slow, heavy tread of a boot on stone, accompanied by the faint jingle of keys. A night watchman, his lantern swinging in a lazy arc, was making his rounds. I held my breath, my own voice a strained, urgent whisper. "Holmes, we must go," remarked Victor Trevor. "Patience," deduced Sherlock Holmes. He breathed the word, his eyes fixed on the approaching light. "Panic is the luxury of the unprepared. Be still," replied Sherlock Holmes. The footsteps grew louder, a steady, ominous beat. The lantern light washed over the opposite wall. It crept across the lane. For one terrifying second, it illuminated the very edge of our hiding place. Then it moved on. The watchman passed, oblivious, his footsteps receding into the quiet dark. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Without a word, Holmes darted from our sanctuary and crept towards the lighted window, crouching low beneath the sill. I followed, my earlier fear replaced by a surge of adrenaline. From within, we could hear agitated voices. Holmes motioned for me to draw closer, and we strained our ears against the cold glass. One voice, high and strained with frustration, rose above the others. "It is no use. Our methods are utterly obsolete. Sir Reginald demands a solution, but the Americans will ruin us before we can devise one," remarked first employee. The reply was a low growl, thick with anger. "Then we must acquire a solution, and at any cost. He does not care how, only that it is done. Find me something, or find yourself another position," second employee replied. A chair scraped violently against the floor inside. A shadow fell across the curtain. A face, pale and furious, appeared at the window, peering directly out into the darkness. For a heartbeat, I was certain our eyes had met. A muffled shout erupted from within. He hissed, already moving. "Now, Trevor, away," remarked Sherlock Holmes. We fled, our feet pounding a frantic rhythm on the cobblestones. We did not dare to look back until we had put 2 streets between ourselves and the office. We leaned against a cold brick wall, catching our breath in ragged gasps. "Good heavens, Holmes, they nearly had us," replied Victor Trevor. He paid my alarm no mind. His eyes gleamed with a fierce, intellectual fire. "Did you hear it, Trevor? Acquire a solution at any cost. Blackwood is not merely interested, he is desperate," declared Sherlock Holmes. "His industrial pride is on the line. A man in that position will not be stopped by mere morality," declared Sherlock Holmes. He straightened up, his brief moment of exertion forgotten, his mind already leaping to the next logical step. The entire posture of the man radiated a newfound certainty. Such desperation requires capital and corporate maneuvering. It leaves a trail not of footprints, but of ink and ledgers. Our next stop is not a dark alley, but a dusty one. Tomorrow, we visit the municipal archives. As we fled Sir Reginald Blackwood's offices, the chill night air stung our lungs. Yet in Holmes's eyes, I saw a fire ignite, a blaze of singular intensity. By morning, Holmes had formulated a new line of attack, one which led us away from the shadows and into the well-lit, yet often more impenetrable, corridors of bureaucracy. A paper trail, Trevor, is as revealing as a footprint in clay. Blackwood is a man of finance. Let us see where his finances lead us, replied Sherlock Holmes. Our first port of call was the university bursar's office, a chamber of imposing mahogany and stern portraits. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old leather. The bursar himself, a man whose face seemed permanently pinched in mild disapproval, listened to Holmes's polite inquiry with a distinct lack of warmth. Mr. Holmes, the ownership of university-leased lands is strictly a matter for our solicitors. To furnish you with private corporate details would be most irregular indeed. University bursar replied, I am merely seeking to understand the proprietorship of the Cambridge brickworks, a matter of public record, I should think, explained Sherlock Holmes. The municipal archives exist for such public inquiries. These ledgers, sir, are sensitive administrative instruments, not lending library books for idle browsing. I must insist you pursue the proper channels. Good day, replied University bursar. He concluded with a dry rustle of papers, a sound of dismissal more final than any spoken word. Undeterred, Holmes led us to the municipal building. It was a cavernous hall, smelling of dry paper and settled dust, where the profound silence was broken only by the scratch of nibs on paper and the occasional solemn cough. A stoop-shouldered clerk at the main desk regarded our request for the commercial ledgers of the past 5 years, as if we had asked for the crown jewels themselves. It is a simple matter of academic research, I assure you, for a project on local industrial growth, responded Victor Trevor. Academic research, HMPH, and which supervising fellow sanctioned this project. These are not storybooks, you know. They are the official record. We can't have just anyone rummaging through them, getting things out of order, replied Clerk. The clerk grunted, eyeing Holmes's unconventional attire. A tense silence stretched between us. Then, leaning in close, Holmes spoke in a low, conspiratorial whisper. A man of your experience, sir, must appreciate the importance of primary sources. We seek only to verify the charter of the Cambridge Brick and Tile Company. A small detail, but accuracy is the cornerstone of all worthy enterprise, is it not? Observed Sherlock Holmes. This subtle flattery worked where Trevor's earnestness had failed. With a heavy sigh that seemed to stir the dust of ages, the clerk shuffled away. He returned some minutes later with 2 immense, leather-bound volumes, their spines cracked and gilded titles faded with age. He deposited them on our table with a resounding thud that echoed through the hall. As we set to our task, poring over the dense columns of script, I became aware that we were not entirely alone in our research. A man, seated several tables away, feigned interest in a different volume, but his own pages remained unturned. He cast frequent, furtive glances in our direction. I noted that his attention seemed to sharpen whenever our whispers became more animated or we turned a page with particular interest. Holmes, listen to this. The brickworks were sold 2 years ago. The purchaser is listed as East Anglian Holdings, Victor Trevor said. He spoke in a low whisper, the sound barely disturbing the room's profound quiet. Holmes did not look up from his own ledger, but merely pointed a long, thin finger at a column of names. A holding company, a common device for obscuring ownership. Now, cross-reference the directors of this East Anglian Holdings with my list. Look under the letter B, Sherlock Holmes said. The only sound was the faint whisper of turning pages. The man across the room shifted in his chair, his focus now undeniably upon us. Trevor's breath caught in his throat. Good heavens! The majority shareholder, the chairman of the board, it is Sir Reginald Blackwood. Victor Trevor answered. Holmes closed his ledger with a soft but decisive snap. The sound made the other researcher flinch. He quickly gathered his papers and made a quiet but swift exit from the hall. Holmes watched him go, a thin, knowing smile playing on his lips. Just as I suspected, it is not merely a case of a rival industrialist seeking an advantage. Blackwood owns the very source of our primary clue, the brickworks, observed Sherlock Holmes. He paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle in the dusty air between us. His interest is not merely in acquiring the prototype. By controlling the brickworks, he has access, resources, a direct link to the crime itself. He is not some distant puppet master, Trevor. He is intimately connected to the board. Sherlock Holmes responded. The web was now visible, its strands connecting the stolen device to the highest echelons of Cambridge industry. Yet the black and white print of a ledger felt insufficient. It mapped the motive, but not the man. We have the what, Trevor, but we need more of the how. We need to understand the character of a man who would stoop to such direct methods of espionage, declared Sherlock Holmes. I believe it is time we consulted someone who has dealt with Sir Reginald's ambitions firsthand. It is time we paid a call on Professor Finch, stated Sherlock Holmes. The ledgers in the municipal archive had provided the skeleton of the conspiracy. Now, Holmes declared, his eyes glinting with determination, we require its soul. We left the gaslit archive for the ancient stones of the college. The damp air carried the scent of wet earth, and a distant clock chimed the hour. Our footsteps were the only sound in the cloistered quadrangle as we approached the rooms of Professor Alistair Finch. A warm, yellow light spilled from his window. Within, the air smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. A fire crackled in the hearth, its light dancing on walls lined with books. Professor Finch, his hair a shock of white against the dark wood of his chair, rose to greet us, the tick of a mantel clock marking the silence. Ah, Holmes, and Dr. Watson as well. What an unexpected pleasure at this late hour. To what do I owe the visit? I trust your inquiries are bearing fruit, remarked Professor Alistair Finch. They are, Professor, forming a chain of remarkable strength. But a chain is mere metal. I have come to you for your expertise not in classics, but in character. Tell me, have you ever found the world of industry to be an intrusive neighbor to that of academia? Explained Sherlock Holmes. Finch motioned for us to sit, his expression growing thoughtful. He lowered himself back into his chair, the old leather groaning softly under his weight. He stared into the fire for a long moment before he spoke, his voice taking on a graver note. An astute question. It is a pressure that has grown more palpable of late. The new titans of industry, men of iron and steam, believe that all things have a price, even knowledge, even integrity, answered Professor Alistair Finch. He paused, picking up a silver letter opener from his desk and turning it over in his fingers. The firelight glinted on the polished metal. Some years ago, I was approached by just such a man, Sir Reginald Blackwood. He wished to endow a new chair, a handsome prospect on the surface. His munificence, however, came with conditions. He sought influence, a voice in our curriculum, a means to steer our best minds towards his own commercial endeavors. He spoke of progress, but his eyes spoke only of profit. And you refused him? Asked Dr. John Watson. A faint, wry smile touched the professor's lips. He set the letter opener down with a quiet click, politely at first, but he was persistent. When his offers were rebuffed, his tone changed. The talk of partnership became a veiled lecture on the irrelevance of the old ways. He implied that those who did not bend to the will of progress would simply be broken by it. There was a ruthlessness in him, a conviction that his wealth gave him the right to acquire not just companies, but men's principles. I showed him the door, answered Professor Alistair Finch. Holmes had been leaning forward, his gaze fixed upon the professor with an unnerving intensity. He now sat back, a look of profound satisfaction on his sharp features. The pieces, I could see, had clicked into their final, damning alignment within his mind. Thank you, Professor. You have provided the moral context the ledgers could not. A man who believes he can purchase a scholar's soul would not scruple to steal a student's invention. It reminds me of a lesson from my college days. Watson, a matter involving my friend Victor Trevor. The most respectable facades often hide the most appalling corruption. You have confirmed the nature of the beast, replied Sherlock Holmes. We took our leave, stepping back into the cool, foggy night. The damp air muffled the city, leaving only the hiss of gas lamps and the distant clatter of a lone, hansom cab. Holmes walked in determined silence for several minutes before stopping under a lamp on Trumpington Street, his eyes gleaming. The web is complete, Watson. Every strand is accounted for, from the clay on a windowsill to the ambition in a predator's heart. We have all we need. Now, we must simply present the case, declared Sherlock Holmes. The lamps in Holmes's lodgings were turned down low, casting long, dancing shadows upon the walls cluttered with charts and chemical apparatus. A chill November wind rattled the window panes, its mournful whistle a counterpoint to the steady crackle of the fire in the grate. Victor Trevor sat rigidly in his chair, his gaze fixed upon my friend, whilst poor Thomas Ashton, pale and drawn, wrung his hands in his lap. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, the quiet before a storm. Holmes stood before the hearth, his tall, lean figure silhouetted against the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a calm, almost surgical precision, quite unlike his usual energetic tone. Gentlemen, you have been patient. I have asked you here tonight because the threads of this peculiar problem have at last been drawn together. There is no need for a physical trap, for the most effective snare is one woven from logic. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He paused, the firelight glinting in his eyes as he surveyed us. Ashton looked up, his own expression a mixture of hope and dread. You know who it is, Holmes. You have discovered the thief, Thomas Ashton said. I have discovered the hand that took the prototype, yes. But the mind that guided it is another matter entirely. Our inquiry begins where the crime did, with a smear of reddish clay upon your windowsill, Ashton, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Holmes began to pace. The rhythmic tap of his shoes on the floorboards punctuated his words, adding tension to the silence. Not just any clay. Its particular composition, high in ferric oxide, is unique to the soil beds near the Cam, but only in one specific location, the old Eddington brickworks. A simple matter of chemical analysis confirmed it. The Eddington brickworks. Holmes, that place is a ruin. It's been abandoned for years, responded Victor Trevor. Defunct, yes, but not without an owner. A search of the county deeds reveals the land was purchased 2 years ago by a holding company, replied Sherlock Holmes. He stopped pacing and fixed Trevor with a sharp look. A holding company signifies a desire for anonymity. A desire I penetrated with little effort to find its primary director, Sir Reginald Blackwood. At the mention of that name, a name Professor Finch had spoken with such disdain, the final pieces began to fall into place in my own mind. Trevor swore softly under his breath, but Ashton merely stared, his confusion deepening. Blackwood, but how? Who would do his bidding? Replied Thomas Ashton. Someone with access to the college grounds. Someone familiar with your habits. Someone who, perhaps, appeared to be a friend. The most powerful motive is not always greed. Often it is desperation, observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's voice softened slightly, a rare note of sympathy entering his tone. He turned his gaze towards Ashton. I therefore investigated the financial standings of those in your immediate circle, Ashton. It is a sad and public fact that the Whitfield family has fallen upon calamitous times, declared Sherlock Holmes. The Whitfields. But what has that to do with anything? Thomas Ashton said. Everything. Their estate, their name, all of it is mortgaged to a single, ruthless creditor. That creditor is, of course, Sir Reginald Blackwood, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. A sharp gasp escaped Ashton's lips. He looked as though he had been struck, his face paling even further in the dim light. Miss Whitfield? Elena? No, it cannot be. She has been nothing but supportive. She despises men like Blackwood, Thomas Ashton replied. She was not his accomplice. She was his tool, a pawn in a game she could not hope to win. Blackwood held her family's ruin in his hand and gave her an ultimatum, replied Sherlock Holmes. The room was utterly silent now, save for the crackling fire. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Secure your prototype, or he would destroy them. The clay on her boot, gathered from a clandestine meeting at the brickworks to receive her instructions, tells the entire story. Her motive was not malice, but a terrible, coerced loyalty. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The crime now seemed not merely a theft, but a tragedy. Trevor rose from his chair, his fists clenched. Then we go to the constables at once. We have him, responded Victor Trevor. No, a man of Blackwood's stature would deny everything. Her word, given under duress, would be dismissed. Our only course of action is to secure her willing testimony. We cannot force it from her. We must appeal to her conscience, observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes retrieved his coat from its peg by the door, his movements suddenly brisk and purposeful. The time for quiet contemplation was clearly over, and that is precisely what we shall do now. Trevor, you will accompany me. Ashton, you will remain here. The confrontation must be managed delicately. The final act of this play is about to begin, declared Sherlock Holmes. We were shown into a small, seldom-used sitting room in the east wing of the college library, a place so insulated from the world that the distant rumble of city drays was but a faint memory. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper and beeswax. Motes of dust danced in the single shaft of afternoon light slanting through the tall window. A grandfather clock in the corner marked the passing seconds with a deep, sonorous tick that seemed to amplify the profound silence between us. Trevor paced nervously before the unlit hearth, the scuff of his boots on the Persian rug the only other sound. Holmes, by contrast, stood perfectly still by the window, a figure of immense and patient energy. Holmes, are you certain of this? To accuse Miss Whitfield? It seems an impossibility, a monstrous thing, replied Victor Trevor. Sentiment is a chemical defect found on the losing side, Trevor. The facts are immutable, Sherlock Holmes noted. He gestured dismissively, as if waving away all emotion from the room. The clay on her walking shoe, a sample of which I procured yesterday, is identical to the soil from the lane behind Blackwood's factory. The same soil I found upon Ashton's windowsill. It is the linchpin, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Before Trevor could reply, the door opened with a soft click and Miss Elena Whitfield entered. She appeared composed, though I noted a certain tightness around her eyes. She offered us a polite, if hesitant, smile. Mr. Holmes, Victor, you wish to see me? I confess your summons was most mysterious, Elena Whitfield replied. Holmes turned from the window, his movements fluid and precise. He did not raise his voice, yet it filled the room with an undeniable authority. Indeed, Miss Whitfield, we are here to discuss the matter of Thomas Ashton's prototype, or more specifically, how a woman of your standing came to be in the employ of a man like Sir Reginald Blackwood, remarked Sherlock Holmes. The color drained from her face. Her composure, so carefully constructed, shattered in an instant. In the ensuing silence, the grandfather clock's ticking seemed to grow louder, each second a hammer blow against her crumbling defense. Her hand flew to her throat. I do not know what you mean, remarked Elena Whitfield. Do you not? Your father's shipping firm fell into ruin 6 months ago. The debts were acquired for a pittance by a holding company, declared Sherlock Holmes. He paused, letting the words hang in the still air. The only sound was a sharp intake of breath from Miss Whitfield. A company whose sole director is Sir Reginald Blackwood. He held your family's future in his hand, and he squeezed, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Her eyes, wide with terror, were fixed on Holmes's impassive face as he delivered the final, damning conclusion. He required a service in return for his forbearance, did he not? A simple theft from a trusting student, observed Sherlock Holmes. A choked sob escaped her lips. Trevor took a half-step forward, his face a mask of shock and pity, but Holmes held up a hand to forestall him. The rustle of fabric accompanied Miss Whitfield as she sank into a nearby chair, her shoulders visibly trembling. "He threatened us with debtor's prison. My father, he is not a strong man. I had no choice," answered Elena Whitfield. Her voice broke, the words catching in her throat as she fought back a fresh wave of tears. Blackwood said no one would be harmed, that it was merely an academic rivalry. He promised to return it after he had studied the design. Elena Whitfield answered. Her confession tumbled out, a torrent of fear and regret. She had used her acquaintance with Ashton to gain access, committing the theft whilst he was away at dinner. As her voice trailed off into quiet weeping, the clock in the corner struck the hour. Its chime was answered by a firm, heavy tread in the corridor outside, the sound echoing on the stone flags. "That will be Constable Grimshaw. I took the liberty of arranging his attendance," replied Sherlock Holmes. The door opened again, this time with a decisive creak, to reveal a stout, uniformed officer with a resolute expression. He gave a short nod to Holmes. "Mr. Holmes, your message said it was a matter of some urgency. Is this the party in question?" answered Constable Grimshaw. "It is. Miss Whitfield has agreed to provide a full statement regarding the theft, and more importantly, the man who orchestrated it. Your testimony, madam, will be the key to ensuring Sir Reginald faces justice," observed Sherlock Holmes. Elena looked up, a flicker of resolve hardening her tear-streaked features. She took a deep, steadying breath, the sound audible in the tense quiet of the room. "I will tell you everything. The prototype, it is hidden in the old groundskeeper's shed behind the botany glasshouses. I will show you precisely where," replied Elena Whitfield. The week that followed the unmasking of the plot was one of quiet contemplation. The autumn term drew to a close, and a chill had settled over Cambridge, its damp breath misting the ancient panes of the Dilettante Detectives Club. We were gathered in our usual room, though the mood was far from usual. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, its light dancing upon the spines of leather-bound books and casting long shadows that writhed upon the walls. At the center of our group, upon the great oak table, sat Thomas Ashton's prototype, its brass and copper gleaming, fully restored to its creator. Ashton himself, his face cleared of the desperate anxiety that had haunted it, cradled the device as a father might a child. His relief was a palpable thing in the otherwise somber room. Professor Finch, swirling the contents of his glass, was the first to break the silence. "A victory, Mr. Holmes," Professor Finch intoned, his voice low and resonant. "A definitive victory for your methods. And yet it feels a hollow one, does it not? We have exposed a scoundrel in Blackwood, but we have also seen the ruin of a promising scholar in Miss Whitfield," Professor Alastair Finch said. Victor Trevor shifted in his armchair, the leather groaning in protest. He spoke with a practical bluntness that was his nature. "A dreadful choice, certainly, but one she made. Thanks to your testimony regarding Blackwood's coercion, the authorities were lenient. She will not see the inside of a jail, but her academic career here is irrevocably finished," said Victor Trevor. Professor Finch set his glass down on the oak table with a soft, definitive click. "Irrevocably? Is there truly no path back for her?" responded Professor Alastair Finch. Trevor shook his head, his gaze fixed on the fire. "Her name has been struck from the university rolls. I had word from her father. They've taken her back to their estate in Northumberland." He spoke of disgrace, but also of a grim relief that she is at least free of that scoundrel's influence. She will live a quiet life now, a world away from the one she sought, Victor Trevor answered. Holmes, who had been staring intently into the fire, finally turned his gaze upon us. His eyes were bright, his expression animated by a familiar intellectual fire. He leaned forward, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "It is not merely a matter of choices, Trevor, but of the pressures that forge them. This entire affair is a microcosm of our age. Look at this device. He gestured towards the prototype. Here we have Ashton's brilliant, pure innovation, the very spirit of academic progress. It is a thing of beauty and intellect, Sherlock Holmes said. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, beginning to grasp the larger picture he was painting. And Blackwood, I suppose, represents the darker side of that same progress. The ambition without the intellect, Dr. John Watson commented. Holmes rose and began to pace before the fireplace, his footfalls soft but deliberate on the thick rug. Precisely so, Watson. Then enters industry in the form of Blackwood. He does not wish to create, only to acquire, to profit. He represents progress of a different sort, the relentless, often amoral march of commerce, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He paused in his pacing to pick up the iron poker, nudging a log deeper into the hearth. The fire flared, briefly illuminating the intensity on his face. When these two forces meet, they create a crucible. Miss Whitfield, caught between her family's honor and this industrial pressure, was simply the point at which the vessel cracked, remarked Sherlock Holmes. He paused, his sharp profile silhouetted against the flames. The only sounds were the hiss and pop of the burning logs and the distant, mournful chime of a college bell tolling the hour. Ashton ran a hand over the cool brass of his device. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet and laced with a newfound maturity. I had never considered, I saw only the science, the problem to be solved. I did not see the world into which my solution would be born, remarked Thomas Ashton. Precisely, his voice sharpened with conviction. And that is the grandest problem of all. Crime is not an isolated act, it is a social artifact. Sherlock Holmes responded. His gaze swept across us, Finch, Trevor, Ashton, myself, as if we were exhibits in his new laboratory of human nature. To understand the criminal, one must understand their world, their ambitions, their fears, their chemistry, their botany, their very footprints in the mud. It is a science, waiting to be codified. Professor Finch smiled, a slow, appreciative expression. A science of deduction. You have found your great work, I think, Mr. Holmes, not in a laboratory of chemicals, but in the laboratory of human nature itself, responded Professor Alastair Finch. Later that evening, as Holmes and I walked back towards our lodgings, the gas lamps cast long, golden paths before us on the frosted grass. The air was crisp and cold. He was silent for so long, lost in thought, that I finally felt compelled to break the quiet. So, what is next for you, Holmes? Back to your chemical experiments, or have you another such puzzle in mind? Wondered Dr. John Watson. He stopped then and looked up, not at me, but at the vast, star-dusted sky above the Gothic spires. His voice, when he spoke, was soft, yet it carried an immense weight of purpose. Neither, my friend. London awaits. A great cesspool, Finch would call it. But to me, it is the richest field of study a man could ask for. Every street, every fog-bound alley is a problem to be solved. The game, as they say, is afoot, replied Sherlock Holmes.